take a journey across a piece of a transcontinental railroad first spiked down by the Northern Pacific in Montana and North Dakota. A line where monster trains traverse rolling prairies and badlands. Past amber waves of grain, where the deer and the antelope still play. And pupjacks sip black gold from beneath the ground. This is BNSF's Dickinson subdivision. This 200-mile highway paved with steel connects the town of Glendive along the Yellowstone River in eastern Montana with Mandan, North Dakota, just across the Missouri River from the state's capital of Bismarck. The railroad was built to connect Minnesota with the Pacific Northwest and Washington state, making the West available to anyone who wanted to settle there. Every town and community we pass through has a rich history tied to the building of the railroad. Two of the biggest commodities are coal, shipped in unit trains from the Powder River Basin, and grain, loaded at numerous facilities and shipped on grain shuttles for various destinations across the U.S. and all over the world. Along with the unit trains, mixed manifests roll between rail hubs scattered across the BNSF system. And many locals scurry back and forth, serving industry all along the line. This is BNSF's Dickinson subdivision. Our journey along the former Northern Pacific Main Line will begin at Glendive, milepost 215.8, and continue east to Mandan, which is milepost 0.0. We will also include the railroad's crossing of the Missouri River just east of Mandan over the classic Northern Pacific Bridge, which dates back to 1882. At the time of this production, the 140-year-old bridge is slated to be torn down as soon as a new bridge over the river is completed. The Dickinson sub is single-track with sidings. As trains travel west to east, they pass the sidings of Curry, Iona, and Hodges before climbing a 1% grade over Beaver Hill. After passing through Yates, we enter the state of North Dakota near Beach and continue to Sentinel Butte, and down through Ryder, where another 1% grade passes through the ghost town of Sully Springs, and over the highest point on the subdivision at Fryburg. This is where we find a new rail terminal for loading crude oil onto unit trains from the Bakken oil fields to the north. Continuing east, the Badlands have transitioned into rolling hills as we pass through South Hart, and the namesake town and yard at Dickinson. Then comes Lehigh, Taylor, Antelope, Hebron, the former station of Eagle Nest, and Glen Ullin. Thanks to a 1948 line relocation, the course is nearly due east now through Dengate toward New Salem, bypassing the Rattlesnake Cutoff, which followed the Curlew Valley to Almont, and up through Sims, which was an important coal and water stop during the steam era. The railroad then drops down through Lyons before reaching our destination of Mandan. We've got a lot to show you, so let's get started now. The old Northern Pacific Rail Yard tells of the importance of Glendive, Montana on its transcontinental route between Minnesota and the Pacific Coast in Washington state. This was headquarters for NP's Yellowstone division between Mandan, North Dakota and Billings, Montana. Along with the old roundhouse and turntable is the former Northern Pacific Depot, which dates back over 100 years to 1922. The original depot was built in 1881 when the railroad established the town. Like many wooden structures of its time, it succumbed to fire in the 1910s. The building of the current depot was delayed due to World War I. Both the depot and the yard continue to play a vital role as the NP faded into the BN in 1970 and BNSF in 1995. Freight continues to move east and west between Minnesota and the Pacific Northwest. Among the biggest commodities are Powder River Basin coal from Wyoming and grain. Local industries are served and cars are switched here, while through trains change crews. In addition to the variety of maintenance of way equipment found here, BNSF has a variety of mothballed EMD motive power, including GP60Bs and SD70 Max pulled from coal service. The Max represent the first generation of AC traction road locomotives used by Burlington Northern and later the BNSF. Of the nearly 1,000 units built for American railroads between 1993 and 2004, 786 wore either Burlington Northern or BNSF paint. Glendive serves as a division point between the Dickinson sub to the east and the Forsyth sub, which continues west toward Billings. It also is a connection with the Circle sub, which branches west for 50 miles to Circle, and the Sidney sub, which follows the Yellowstone River north through Sidney, Montana, to a junction with the former Great Northern Line at Snowden, Montana, BNSF's Highline route. The 6-span through-truss bridge over the Yellowstone is the connection with these two routes. The bridge is 1,337 feet in length and accessed by a junction just west of the yard. BNSF 4247 slowly leads an empty rock train over the bridge after coming out of the yard. It will take its train onto the Circle sub after crossing the river. Early explorers described the Yellowstone River as a mile wide and an inch deep. Although that may have been a little bit of an exaggeration, it does paint a pretty good picture of the watercourse that guided Northern Pacific across a good chunk of Montana. To the west, the old NP main line follows the river for over 300 miles to Livingston, Montana, on the east side of Bozeman Pass, the gateway to Yellowstone National Park. Another important bridge to the city of Glendive is the Bell Street Bridge. The original crossing was built in the mid-1890s, so stockmen and farmers could gain access to the railroad on the far side. That bridge was washed out by a flood and ice jam in 1899 and replaced by this bridge in 1926. It remains today as a pedestrian bridge, a centerpiece for the town that the city lights up at night with thousands of LED lights. Visiting the yard in the late afternoon, an eastbound coal train waits for a fresh crew to take it to Mandan, while an empty coal train approaches on the main for a crew change. This train is just completing its run over the Dickinson subdivision. The outbound crew will take this train 124 miles west to Forsyth. At Jones Junction, east of Billings, it will turn to the southwest toward Gillette, Wyoming, and on to the mines in the Powder River Basin. These coal trains are usually run in a 2x1 configuration. A remote-controlled EMD SD70 Yates brings up the rear of this westbound. A few railroad artifacts exist near the Glendive Dinosaur and Fossil Museum, including this extended vision caboose wearing the classic Northern Pacific Herald. Based on the Chinese yin-yang, it was adopted in 1893 to symbolize NP's route to the Orient. This motor car makes us think about the life of a track inspector working in the heat and cold of Montana and North Dakota in the decades before the high rail pickup. Northern Pacific built its line west from Minnesota. The section of main line we are visiting between Mandan and Glendive was known as the Missouri River Division. As we turn east, the railroad leaves the Yellowstone River, following Glendive Creek for the first few miles. As we look the country over, we can see the challenge Northern Pacific would have faced in getting supplies. This was a far cry from the timberlands of Minnesota, where railroad ties could easily be made. When construction began in the winter of 1878, Northern Pacific laid tracks over the frozen Missouri River to transport ties, rail, and other needed supplies from bank to bank. When the ice bridge broke apart in the spring, supplies were ferried across the river to Mandan. BNSF 6297 leads a 250-car double coal train out of Glendive. The two trains were just put together for their run to Mandan. This was the only double coal train we observed on the Dickinson sub. It has a combined axle count of 1,036, according to a nearby dragging equipment detector. Eastbound coal trains out here are usually seen running with 2 units on the point and a single DP on the rear. That's why this train's combined configuration is 2 by 3 by 1. The combination of 2- and 4-stroke diesels thunder through the Badlands in the cool morning air. SD70 Ace number 8593 shoves on the rear drawbar of the heavy coal drag as it climbs eastward on a grade of less than 1%. Right behind the coal train, BNSF 6216 heads east through Allard with a short mixed manifest train. In the flat lighting of a cloudy day, this country seems rather bland. Nothing a little stormlight won't fix. The layers of sandstone, siltstone, and mudstone make up for the lack of vegetation. This big country was a long ways from anywhere in any direction before the rails came. We try to put ourselves in the shoes of the settlers who looked at this land and said, "This is going to be our home." It took a lot of courage and hard work. And even then, there was no guarantee families could hang on and make it go. This was one such place. Named for Leonard Hodges, a Northern Pacific employee who planted trees along the railroad to help improve the scenery. The town became an important stop on the Northern Pacific and had a post office from 1898 to 1968. It seems pretty quiet on this summer evening, but not for long. A westbound is rolling down grade from Beaver Hill and enters the 6,900-foot siding at dusk. The train will wait for the BNSF 6218 East. The grade reaches the summit of Beaver Hill at an elevation of nearly 2,800 feet above sea level. It is the second highest portion of the subdivision, next to Fryburg, 50 miles to the east. It is also the heaviest grade on the subdivision at 65 feet to the mile, or roughly 1%. BNSF 8136 heads westbound over Beaver Hill with a 71-car train. Heading down the east side of Beaver Hill, the railroad passes through the easternmost town we will encounter in the state of Montana, Wibaux. Like many western towns, it has had many names over the years, such as Keith, Beaver, and Mingusville. That name came from the combination of Minnie and Gus Grissy, who ran the post office in the late 1800s. In 1895, Mingusville was renamed after Pierre Wibaux, a prominent rancher who immigrated from France. With the arrival of the railroad, Wibaux became a major shipping center for cattle, and great cattle drives from Texas often passed this way. One of the cattlemen who shipped beef to the Northern Pacific was a future President of the United States, Teddy Roosevelt. He drove cattle here from two of his ranches in North Dakota. One night in 1884, Roosevelt had an encounter with a drunk sheep herder carrying a pair of cocked revolvers. The story goes the sheep herder ordered Roosevelt to buy drinks for the whole crowd at Nolan's Hotel. Roosevelt pretended to head toward the bar when he punched the sheep herder 3 times in quick succession. He went down, discharging his revolvers. Roosevelt scooped up the guns before several others drugged the man to a nearby shed to sleep off his liquor. The town at that time was known as Mingusville, and Nolan's Hotel was located right about here along the main line. We came for the trains and found plenty of history. The tracks continue east through the siding of Yates as they climb a slight grade toward the state line. BNSF 5863 West has just crossed into Montana as it leads an empty coal train back toward the Powder River Basin. The train met the BNSF 7065 east at Yates, while a summertime thunderstorm darkens the sky. 6 diesels power a 216-car empty grain train toward the state line near milepost 178. The train is in a 3x2x1 configuration. As the train passes, the storm cell moves on to the southwest, spending its energy over the fields of wheat. Crossing into North Dakota, we stop at Sentinel Butte as a westbound train of empty hoppers slowly passes by. Sentinel Butte is atop of a steady 1% grade that leads the railroad away from the Little Missouri River at Medora, around 20 miles to the east. Eastbound tanks, 110 in all, head downgrade with the Ferromex EMD lending a hand. Sentinel Butte was founded in 1902 along the Transcontinental Railroad. The town has a population of around 60 people. Its name comes from the prominent butte located about 3 miles south of town. We enjoy our setting with the warm evening light upon us as another day of rail fanning draws to a close. October finds the countryside dressed in shades of brown as we continue east along the Dickinson subdivision. Cattle graze in the Badlands near Old Highway 10 as an eastbound coal train glides downgrade toward Ryder. We can see the wash of heat exhausted by each engine's dynamic brake fans as they keep the speed of the heavy coal hoppers in check. Dynamic brakes electronically convert the train's speed to heat, using each engine's traction motor as generators to produce an electrical current which is sent to a dynamic brake grid. Think of electric burners on a kitchen stove, only quite a bit larger. The energy sent to the grid creates resistance of the traction motor against the speed of the train. You can hear each engine's dynamic brake fans working as they pass below us in this cut. The train slows as it approaches Ryder. Returning in the summer, BNSF 7633 leads an empty grain train near the same location with a Canadian National SD70M-2 number 8923 in the head-end consist. This extra long train has 2 sets of DPUs, 2 mid-train and 1 more on the rear. Like the coal train from the previous fall, this train slows through the curves as it approaches the siding of Ryder. It'll meet our next westbound at Fryburg, around 20 miles to the east. That train turned out to be the BNSF 6746, leading 172 empty hoppers west. Take a look at the unique number boards on the cab. 6746 was in a wreck on the Norfolk Southern in Rome, Georgia in September of 2022. The locomotive was repaired at Altoona Works in Pennsylvania, where it received the Norfolk Southern style number boards and apparently the grab irons as well. Pretty unique engine. Since this unit train is all empties, the rear DP number 6250 is not needed and simply tags along for the time being. BNSF 6301 nears Medora with its empty coal train. The track passes through the Theodore Roosevelt National Park. Roosevelt first came to North Dakota to hunt bison in September of 1883. During that trip, he fell in love with the rugged frontier lifestyle and what he called the perfect freedom of the West. He invested in 2 cattle ranches in the area, and we have already shared one of the stories from that era of his life. These Badlands are visible from a rest area just off Interstate 94, which passes through the park. To the south, pump jacks perform the monotonous task of sipping oil from wells beneath the ground. Except for the wind and occasional passing train, this is the only sound here. On the railroad timetable, we have made it to Sully Springs, named for General Alfred H. Sully, who camped here in 1864, near a spring that he said produced very good water. In 1880, Northern Pacific established a section house, and soon a town grew, complete with a general store and 3 saloons. The flourishing frontier town gained fame thanks to the railroad. Even the London Times mentioned Sully Springs in an 1882 article about the American West. BNSF 4752 leads another empty grain train east toward the sighting of Sully Springs on a clear October day. Besides being a home for railroad section men and their families, buffalo hunters used Sully Springs as a shipping point for buffalo hides and robes until the herds declined in 1883. By 1911, the frontier gateway to the Badlands had a post office and a school by 1933. The Great Depression and the Dust Bowl spelled the end of Sully Springs. It was completely abandoned by 1939. The siding is 9,592 feet in length. It is on another 1% grade, which climbs to the highest point on the subdivision at Fryburg. BNSF 6190 leads an empty coal train westbound. Behind the coal train, BNSF 7663 takes loaded oil cans westbound. A pair of buffer cars have been placed in the middle of the train. This is where manned helpers will be added on the former MRL grades of Bozeman Pass in Livingston and Mullen Pass in Helena. The burned-out ditch light means BNSF 6301 has caught up with us again on its eastbound journey. The train climbs the grade toward Fryburg. After Sully Springs was abandoned, the federal government bought up the land and put it into the Little Missouri National Grasslands. Nothing remains of the town except for a sign on the railroad siding. Northern Pacific's account of the building through the Badlands goes something like this. where grotesque buttes of clay, baked into terracotta by subterranean fires of lignite, forced engineers to make numerous curves and in some places deep cuts through the soft brick-like substance. Before this, the 136 miles between Mandan and Fryburg had been light work, except for numerous bridges. A westbound empty coal train drops down grade towards Sully Springs on a cloudy afternoon. The next sighting to the east is found at the top of the grade at Fryburg. At 2,800 feet above sea level, this is the highest point on the Dickinson subdivision. The Badlands have transitioned into rolling hills rich with crops, like this field of corn you see here. Fryburg is the southern terminus of the 132-mile Bakken Link crude gathering pipeline project, which runs due south from Beaver Lodge, North Dakota. Unit crude oil trains for BNSF are loaded at this facility, which is owned by Great Northern Midstream. Our eastbound grain train appears again at the west switch of Fryburg as we watch a meet unfold with a westbound coal train. This empty grain train consists of 232 cars. In addition to the 3 units on the point, 2 more remote-controlled DPs are cut in mid-train, and a 6th unit brings up the rear of this monster. After crossing 135th Avenue, the train meets the BNSF 6746 West with its not-so-small train of empty hoppers. Nearing the west switch, the 6746 meets the mid-train DPs. With the eastbound finally clear, the dispatcher hangs a green for the 6746, which slowly gets underway. We just wanted to get another run-by to take a look at the job Altoona Works did on this BNSF locomotive. That grade crossing is the town's main street. We take another look at the Bakken Link terminal as our westbound starts down the hill toward the Badlands. As more of the train tips over the apex, the engineer will soon be transitioning from power to dynamics for the 1% descent toward Sully Springs. These long trains can sure cause a mess, blocking grade crossings for extended periods of time during rush hour. Fortunately, this westbound is picking up speed, and the traffic jam will soon be over. As the empty coal buckets ride off into the evening sun, we turn east for the namesake town of the subdivision. A local switches cars at Dickinson Yard. It was originally called Pleasant Valley Siding by the Northern Pacific in 1880. It was renamed after the railroad official who plotted the town site in 1882. Early Russian, Ukrainian, Scandinavian, and German settlers were attracted to the area by the rich prairie soil. In recent years, the oil boom has brought significant growth to the town. Setting up just east of town, CN 3854 is on the point of a local, which is departing Dickinson in the gathering dusk. After crossing the Heart River a few times near Lehigh, it is another 1% climb through the rolling hills toward the small town of Gladstone. BNSF 6373 leads another unit train of Powder River Basin coal toward milepost 99. And that's how many miles we still have to explore between here and Mandan. Arriving at Gladstone, or Happy Rock if you please, you will find a familiar date that correlates with the building of the railroad. Settlers came here from Wisconsin and found the soil good for farming, along with underground wealth including coal, clay for building bricks, and deposits of agate sand. Like many prairie towns, the grain elevators are the centerpiece. BNSF 6269 is lugging another double grain train with 232 cars through town on a lazy summer afternoon. East of Gladstone, near I-94, is a local landmark sculpture named Geese in Flight. It is one of several large sculptures made from scrap metal by local artist Gary Greff. At 110 feet tall and 150 feet wide, it made the Guinness Book of World Records in 2002 as the world's largest scrap metal sculpture. Returning our gaze to the rails, BNSF 9080 is westbound as it ducks under the interstate with more empty coal buckets looking to be filled in Wyoming. The train slowly rounds a curve as it passes through Gladstone on a cloudy day just after a good summer rain. Earlier, we saw a local switching cars in Dickinson with the BNSF 7648 and the 6800. It has been busy this afternoon at Richardton and now returns west with several tanks loaded with ethanol. There is a large ethanol facility at the top of the hill at Richardton, and we'll get to see it shortly. As the local continues toward Dickinson, let's turn east across the prairie. Nearly 90% of North Dakota consists of farm and ranch land, totaling over 39 million acres. That's why the main line often passes grain elevators such as these between Gladstone and Taylor. A former UP SD-45 resides here to shuffle grain hoppers during the busy season. It was built in 1970 as the Norfolk and Western 1767. The railroad follows the Old Red, Old 10 Scenic Byway east through the community of Taylor. Actually, it is the highway that follows the railroad. What caught our eye was this huge mobile with kids' bikes and pedal tractors that someone put a lot of time and work into. Unfortunately, the wind wasn't blowing on the day that we stopped, so we returned about 3 months later, and voila! Back to the rails, BNSF 6835 is westbound between Mandan and Dickinson, where it'll be stopping to do some work. We have moved just west of Richardton to a rural grade crossing off the Old Red, Old 10 Scenic Byway. A local out of Mandan is approaching with a pair of EMD SD70i diesels for power. The markings on these units say SD75M, but they do feature EMD's isolated cabs, hence the I designation. The crew have just set out a handful of mothballed SD70 Max in a nearby yard before continuing west to Dickinson. We caught several run-bys of that consist, as you will see coming up. Control point CP854 is for a yard and loop track for grain elevators at the west end of town. The local is seen again on a different day, heading west. Tank cars for ethanol are spotted on one of the loop tracks adjacent to the main line. Another classic elevator stands along the tracks at Richardton, while in the distance is the Red Trail Energy ethanol production plant, which is served by the railroad. It looks like an old SD9 Cadillac serves the plant, and while we didn't get to see it in operation, we still got our EMD fix thanks to the power consist which is approaching us now. The local has 3 SD70 Max dead in tow, and it would be setting out these units shortly after we captured this run-by. The scenic byway drops under the main line near the siding of Antelope, around milepost 79. The grade here is just over 0.5% as a local heads west. The historic Highway 10 is designated as a scenic byway between Mandan and Dickinson. It represents the early efforts by American Automobile Association to provide a route across North Dakota. The easiest course was to build the road along the Northern Pacific. It started as a dirt trail in the early 1900s, a small section of an even larger project to span the continent from New York City to Seattle. Imagine what an adventure that would have been. We are sure that engineers who built this road would never have believed traffic would one day shoot across the state at 80 miles per hour on nearby I-94, let alone fly across the continent in a matter of hours. Today, the old highway sees only local traffic, making it a good road for rail fanning. Moving a mile or so east, we catch a lash-up of SD-70 Max again. All three Grinstein Green units were originally built for Burlington Northern, representing the last new power acquired by the railroad before the merger that created the BNSF. At West Hebron, we find a red over yellow signal indicating an eastbound will be taking the siding. The eastbound in question is the BNSF 6672 with a mixed merchandise train. Is this what you call an open container? Seriously, there is no danger of content spilling out from the open lid. Tank cars have expansion domes that allow for the product to expand, as well as an access point for filling. With the eastbound in the siding, we see the lights of a westbound in the distance. BNSF 5151 leads another local west toward Dickinson. The third unit in the consist is the CN 3854. We saw it earlier taking the local east. Hebron was founded in 1885. Like most towns in the Dakota Territory, it grew from three basic ingredients: a railroad, a store, and a church. The name Hebron comes from the Bible and means fellowship. It also means that we lose an hour as we cross from Mountain to Central Time. While an eastbound waits in the siding, BNSF 7430 heads west, right about noon. We think. Yep, it's noon. With the westbound in the clear, BNSF 3939 takes a signal to proceed out of the 6,867-foot siding and on to the main toward Mandan. This train likely originated in Laurel, Montana, just west of Billings. Just east of Hebron is another loading facility designed for handling the long 110-car grain shuttles run by the BNSF. Owned by Archer Daniels Midland, the facility was built in 2012 and has a capacity of 2.6 million bushels. Wheat, canola, and other grains are loaded here, benefiting local farmers. While a shuttle train loads at the ADM Benson Quinn facility, BNSF 8373 passes on the main with the other big commodity on the railroad, coal. The train continues east along with the old Highway 10. Both will pass under I-94 in the distance and continue on toward Glen Ullin. We figured this would be a good spot for another run-by of the BNSF 298 and its SD70 Max on their westbound run. In October of the previous year, we caught another eastbound coal train led by BNSF 9329. Track speed is 60, but unit trains rated at over 100 tons per operative brake, like this coal train, are limited to 50 miles per hour. We pass the old station of Eagle Nest and find a double yellow on the approach to Glen Ullin. BNSF 6672 slowly brings its train toward the signals near milepost 60. In the spring of 1879, the Northern Pacific laid tracks westward through the Curlew Valley along Big Muddy Creek. The beautiful glen became a village. One of its founders, Major Alvin Bove, named it Glen Ullin, Glen, a Scottish Gaelic word meaning valley, and Ullin, after one of his favorite pieces of literature, Lord Ullin's Daughter by Scottish poet Thomas Campbell. A small depot still stands near the main line across from the freight loading dock near the end of a stub track. Like many old railroad depots and stations that haven't been torn down, Glen Ullin is still used by maintenance of way. We get one final look at our local out of Mandan with the extra power as the train heads westward toward Richardton. East of Glen Ullin is the beginning of a line relocation dating back to the end of World War II. The original grade headed southeast along the Curlew Valley through the communities of Almont and Sims, but now crosses the Big Muddy Creek on this bridge. The new alignment heads pretty much due east toward New Salem, shortening the route by several miles. During this time, diesel locomotives were replacing steam on the Northern Pacific. Nicknamed the Rattlesnake Cut, the older line to the south led to a strategic coal and water stop at Sims, around 8 miles southeast of here as the crow flies. The town flourished with the coming of the railroad and died when the new cutoff was completed in 1947. All that remains in Sims is a Lutheran church. Part of the newer line relocation is the 6,848-foot siding of Dengate near milepost 40. A high green welcomes an eastbound through the rugged Butte country. Due west, the large features of Twin Buttes serve as a landmark. The railroad sits atop a large fill west of the siding, surrounded by fields of wheat. Our eastbound finally comes into view. BNSF 6280 and CN 3098 lead an 80-car train through Dengate. As the train continues east toward Mandan, the shadows grow long across the plains of North Dakota, and we enjoy the peaceful setting. If you wait quietly long enough, the wildlife begin to show themselves. This evening, a couple of white-tailed does come near us, then shy away. There can be long periods of time in between trains on this line, and that is the case this evening, as we hoped for a nice run-by in the evening light. The sunset was good at least. The new line includes many cuts and fills as it continues east toward New Salem. We are set up on a wooden bridge crossing over the main line not far from the east switch of Dengate. We talked with a local rancher who told us he wasn't too happy with the new alignment since it runs right through his property. He also pointed out a little butte that he said gave a person a commanding view of the area. He told us it was covered in flint, which Indians used to make arrowheads and spears. The rancher speculated that an Indian had sat on that butte and made arrowheads while keeping an eye out for enemy tribes or U.S. soldiers. It is significant since Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer and his men camped near here when on a campaign west of Fort Lincoln. That would have been the Great Sioux War of 1876, which ended with Custer's defeat at the Battle of Little Bighorn. We came for the trains and found pieces of history in the rolling hills of North Dakota. BNSF 298 is heading west again with its 75-car train bound for Dickinson. We again make out the Twin Buttes and barely see a green signal at the west switch as the train heads toward Glen Ullin. Moving 3 miles to the east puts us near milepost 35. A distant block signal shows a green eye, promising another eastbound. More coal loads behind GEVO number 6035 and SD70 MAC number 8838. The coal train met a westbound at New Salem, about 8 miles to the east. Norfolk Southern GEVO number 1223 leads an empty coal train around a curve near North Almont and over Muskrat Creek as it heads our way. Trains out on the prairie are often hard to hear until they're right up on you. On a different day, we get a broadside view of the bridge over Muskrat Creek, while a maintenance of way crew replaces ties during a midday lull in traffic. From a lightly used grade crossing between North Almont and New Salem, BNSF 3939 is spotted again, taking its manifest train east. As the train disappears from view, it climbs a short grade to the town of New Salem. Travelers on Interstate 94 can't miss New Salem. Just look for the large Holstein cow standing on a bluff to the south of the freeway. We would tell you the history of New Salem, but you've heard it several times already, with all the towns that sprouted up along the NPRR. Hoping to catch this coal train through New Salem, We didn't plan on the slow order that had been put in place that brought this train to a crawl. Besides these grain elevators, New Salem has another large grain loading terminal like what we saw at Hebron. It is located on the southeast side of town. East of New Salem, the railroad drops down through Judson and Sweetbriar, following the twisting course of Sweetbriar Creek to its meeting with the Heart River near Lyons. Westbound coal empties are not long out of Mandan as they pass over the west switch of the 7,086-foot siding at milepost 8.3. Just before entering the yard at Mandan, the railroad crosses the Heart River on this single span through Truss Bridge. We catch the BNSF 3939 one final time as it slowly enters the yard. Before entering, the crew must first obtain permission from the Mandan yardmaster, who will then tell them what track to bring their train in on. The train must stop so the conductor can throw the switch by hand before proceeding on. Founded in 1879 on the west side of the upper Missouri River, Mandan played an important role in the building of the Northern Pacific. When the Transcontinental Railroad arrived in the summer of 1873, the Bismarck-Mandan area became the westernmost extension of the Northern Pacific. The original railroad work camp on this side of the river was called Morton. The first postmaster renamed it Cushman in March of 1879. That was his surname. Well, apparently Cushman didn't give anyone in town the warm fuzzies, because in September of that year, the town was officially renamed Mandan. The beautiful colonial-style depot was built in 1930 to replace the original 1882 depot, which had suffered a fire 10 years earlier. The depot welcomed throngs of passengers of the North Coast Limited and Main Streeter, boasting destinations like Yellowstone National Park and Seattle. When passenger service via Amtrak's North Coast Hiawatha ended in 1979, Burlington Northern turned the depot and the beanery over to the city of Mandan, which remodeled and leased the buildings to area businesses. A piece of history from the golden age of railroading that can still be enjoyed today. BNSF's Mandan Yard is one of the largest in North Dakota. It marks the division point with the Jamestown subdivision, continuing east over the river through Bismarck and onto KO Junction Switch, west of Fargo. Not surprisingly, a couple of coal trains have paused, most likely waiting fresh crews before continuing east. Most are headed for power plants in North Dakota, Minnesota, and Wisconsin. Cars are switched for destinations to the north, east, and west. Like Glendive, a turntable still remains for turning engines, although the roundhouse is long gone. The building on the south side of the yard is the car shop, one of only two in the state. The city of Bismarck can be seen in the distance, and from our high vantage point we can just make out the large trusses of the Missouri River Bridge. Stretching 1,470 feet across the river, the BNSF Missouri River Bridge was first opened in 1882, costing over $1 million to build, in 1882 dollars. Before the bridge was completed, work was already underway on the Northern Pacific's Missouri Division, today's Dickinson sub. Rail, ties, and other supplies were ferried across the river from Bismarck. To get supplies across in the wintertime, Northern Pacific laid tracks across the ice and ran this train back and forth over the frozen river. This image is dated March 1879. This went on for several weeks until water flowing on top of the ice became deep enough to snuff out the fire in that 440. The fun was over. Construction of the railroad bridge began on the 1st of September 1881. And the last span was put in place on October 18th the following year. It was opened 3 days later. That bridge has carried rail traffic for over 140 years, through 2 world wars, and into the age of heavy unit trains with distributed power. Today, a newer 1,500-foot bridge is in the works, slated for completion in 2026. It is being designed to carry heavier trains without any of the restrictions of the older through-truss design. That being said, the old Northern Pacific Bridge is a grand piece of engineering that has stood the test of time. We'll be sorry to see it go. In the meantime, our final train crosses the Missouri River as it begins the next leg of its journey on BNSF's Jamestown subdivision. As always, until next time, thanks for watching.